So you're talking about more partnering with NGOs, more tough love. I'm just wanting you to worry about the attention you're giving to walls. You might be creating more risk-taking just because you're underscoring walls, but beyond that, I could absolutely see us be part of an educational, tough love, communications, after-school program coalition. I'm kind of worried that the results are trailing.
Well, the results from this program in Seattle were amazing in terms of getting the kids involved.
Can you show me, can I get numbers in 2014 on a decrease in wall falling from these kinds of interventions, you think?
Well, it depends. I mean, we can work on it, but I guess that was a little soon to get.
I would love results in 2014. Was there one other? Yes, Elena.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm thinking about the big picture and, you know, the vision for the city. I'm also thinking about your legacy and what you want to leave behind as mayor of the city. And so, you know, thinking about what kind of community do we really want to be? And pulling back from necessarily focusing in on the apartment owners, private property owners, but they do have responsibility. So, a couple of things. How about really doing a cost-benefit analysis and what the real trade-offs are about, you know, fixing the walls or doing that thing, but really tying it to a larger community vision. The other thing is there's a set of hardcore strategies we can take and also soft sell strategies. But the other item we haven't really addressed is what is the liability associated with eggs falling off the walls? So, for example, private property owners, I mean, I think there's some behind-the-scenes conversation you can be having with those private property owners about the liability issues. And really, that might turn things around and open up conversation in a very different way, and particularly a partnership around building a community that we all share a vision for.
Two comments, and then let's see what you've given the mayor on this. Stay with me. We've got 15 minutes left, and I want a sharp solution out of us. On the issue of cost benefit, certainly we've hired among your numbers some crackerjack analysts who can run some numbers for us. And I'm wondering if the cost and benefit is pretty straightforward when you do death and severe injury prevention. But it might not be. There might be some things as to benefits of wall injury prevention that we're not thinking of. With regard to liabilities, it strikes me as the mayor as the one thing that we got going that we can play across all constituencies. Nobody likes liability. Nobody likes legal exposure. So if somehow that becomes meaningful in the equation, it's certainly meaningful for the city council. In fact, they could spend more money on preventing liability than we might even want them to, just because they're so scared about risk. But it might be a meaningful way to enter that discussion with the private landowners. Final comment from Sandra.
So if somebody falls off my wall on my property, they're gonna sue me big time. So
Well, the liability is uneven. I mean, it all has to do with how attractive the nuisance was. So don't assume that every falling off a wall is compensable if the citizen entered the property on their own volition, should have known that the hazard was there, recklessly went up the wall. It's not that clear that in all cases the property owner would be liable, especially if it's back further on the property. It's not an attractive nuisance. Let me ask you this question. This is a lightning round question for my crackerjack staff. In one sentence or less, what is the implicit criterion that you utilize to develop your policy alternative? What performance were you trying to gain when you said, let's do X rather than Y, or let's do X in this way? What were your criteria that caused you, that drove you to those alternatives? Yes.
Reducing the number of children, eggs, injured.
Okay, so would you say that's the number one metric, wall falling? The number of avoided incidents of wall falling is your number one metric. Maybe since you were cost conscious, maybe that's effectiveness, maybe it's efficiency, and your criteria was was number of wall fallings prevented per dollar spent. Is that your dominant metric? What were your other criteria?
Direct liability exposure is usually mine, which is
Yeah.
cost metric also, but
So it's related to costs and benefits, number of wall falls per dollar spent, but it's so meaningful that you might want to carry it as an explicit, separate, distinct, measurable criteria. What else, Todd?
So just to go on what you were saying, it's a risk assessment. What is the risk, the probability of the eggs being, falling down versus the cost of preventing
Yeah.
that from occurring?
So depending on what goes into that, that may be the initial metric that I raised. Remember I said avoidance. There's, Marika, I'm sure we'll get into this, but our senior policy advisor to the mayor may talk about this further when we do the work of the mayor's staff. But you could have a situation where in general, your wall fallings would be reduced, but there is some element that itself carries a non-performance risk. So you might have a criteria that's behaving a little differently. Other criteria, there were a couple that were huge. Yes?
Well, one that I was trying to work out is to not put the onus of this on any one particular stakeholder group.
Even if they're deeply involved in it?
Well, it
Yeah.
just, because
So
it
you
doesn't seem
have-
like there's one particular group that is totally responsible.
Not
for it.
totally, but apartment owners are more responsible. So you're saying either for feasibility, or for support reasons, or for equity reasons, you want to be careful not to, you're worried about impact and effect and support of that particular constituency. And you could elevate that as a specific criteria. Stacy?
Just acceptability by the community, or whether or not.
So general community support, which you want, you're the mayor. Yes, Paul?
Mine was based on trying to either balance or check assumptions.
Pardon?
But mine was based on either trying to balance or check assumptions that we may have. When I said
But
either.
wouldn't every criteria challenge or, yeah, so you're saying, you're asking that question for a very important reason. You're saying, do nothing or do everything should be on the table too. Why are we going back and forth in the middle? Why are we doing this at all? What is the market failure? What is the reasonable public expectation that we can prevent all wall falling? Let's have a threshold question. Should we be doing anything? Let's not let our mayor talk us into something that isn't even a smart thing to do. Maybe it's not valuable. So there's lots of things that we want to do that maybe we shouldn't be doing. So you're making sure we ask that threshold question. Yes?
The reduction in the EFT or emergency response costs to the city.
So that's a dimension of your cost benefit. If you were doing, later on when Marika talks about more about the in-depth policy analytics, that metric is really dominant in this case. It's the evidence with regard to the benefits and costs of wall falling interventions, number of incidents reduced per dollar spent. And so you are weighing your cost of education with your cost of response equipment. So let's just see, and Marika can comment on this. The mayor says, thank you very much, staff members, welcome to Pleasantville. We're looking forward to working with you on countless community problems. We're impressed by your display of analytical expertise. And because Pleasantville cares so much about effective solutions and about preventing human misery, we'll be working you throughout your term of office with us on expanding your analytical techniques. So thank you very much. So let's see what we got, and we'll get Marika to comment on this too. So you want to lower the lights a little bit? So often these kinds of things come up, and as you know, when Marika starts working you over, it's all about driving real data to the extent it's available into the cells of the matrix, right? The reason why we do Humpty Dumpty, I think you know, is because if we started out with a common issue in Washington State today, you'd all have a viewpoint to start out with. But if you do Humpty Dumpty, you don't have a dog in that hunt. You're just thinking about it as, how do you analyze this? From what Paul says, maybe you're doing nothing, to all the kinds of interventions that you crafted that are very much the last chapter of Bardak. Last chapter of Bardak, think of regulation, think of education, think of market incentives and this and that. So you did that. Think very explicitly about your criteria, so you did that. It happens as this is a case where there's a big old dominant criteria, and that is efficiency, the cost of separate provable strategies to decrease wall fall. So that's a big deal to you, and if you end out thinking that's $1 million per wall fall prevented, that might send you back to the bike paths right then, because over there you might get much more responsiveness to your intervention. So that's a big old criteria, but in addition to the ones you mentioned, there's some others. Equity you raised, you were interested in the distribution by income and ethnicity, by neighborhood of the city. That's equity as a criteria. And then Scott introduced a very strong criteria. You're not, if you're a mayor or an analyst, going to, by law, require the change in the behavior of another human being if you don't have to. I mean, so the trade-off in here is pretty interesting, because you might be able to get units of misery prevention by increasing units of private property owner regulation. So that's the obvious trade-off of the case. So what I would say before I ask Marika what she would say is, you guys did great. You went toward the numbers you should really want to know. It's not just the incidence of wall fall in my 6, 8, and 4, which deliberately was to not really tell you much, but it's number of incidents per population in similar cities over time. You really want to know whether you got an extra special Pleasantville wall falling issue, or you've got just a basic common childhood hazard thing that you still would need to work on it. But if you've got wall falling of epidemic proportions, you want to know. And I didn't give you anything to go on, but you tried, which is what you need to do. You tried to learn what some other possible solutions were. I fed you that thing about construction core in another city. You are, as a part of your work as analysts or managers in government and nonprofits, looking for a promising practice in other place. You guys did that, so I think you acquitted yourself quite well. I really, really liked the way you drove toward incentives and insurance and stuff, and how to make it more palatable. I was clearly telling you that you couldn't get this fixed just on public property. The mayor would have loved to have that be a solution. I was telling you you couldn't get it done. And you were working really hard with delaying the retrofit, or insurance, or incentives, choices, how you could get that stakeholder environment to behave as you try and do something. So I think you did that nicely. Another thing I want to say is this, of course, those words are pretty general, but there are some things that you would know. You would know that if you could retrofit Everwall immediately, that it would have more immediate results at great cost than education. You would generally know that even if you weren't convincing people in your education to go up the wall, you would know that those are trailing results. However, as you know, from recycling to smoking to everything else, once you spend the money to secure that outcome with a 9-year-old, you might have the gift that keeps on giving for 60 years. So in year 3 of that education initiative, it might be cost-free and might be delivering the benefits forevermore. So that's the power of education. So you see trade-offs. Say if you have a geographic distribution issue, then it could be that working on the King's Horses and King's Bend improvement for everyone doesn't give you a great response. what I put in the cells doesn't really matter. The point about trade-offs is you're trying to be very direct and very intentional about where your trade-offs are. Here, it's crystal clear. Your number one trade-off is, you know that if you slip the cuffs on every apartment landowner who had a bad wall, you would fix the private property thing right away, and you know you're not gonna do that. So you're trying to trade off the results that would secure versus the extent to which you're willing to impose on their personal choice making. And that's the number one trade-off of the case. Other thoughts, lessons, concerns from Professor Clement? What do you think?
Wall falling is a big problem, I think. This is a great setup for what we're gonna do next, which is take a different look at it beyond wall falling. But I agree with David, your questions and comments were wonderful, right on point. And we're gonna talk a lot more about some of the details of this and some of the issues like, what should your criteria look like? Does it make sense to have accidents over dollars, or should those be separated for some reason? Or should you be separate? I think David suggested maybe you even want to look at different kinds of accidents, eggs versus kids, because, I don't know, are eggs in school? I don't know. So you might want to separate those because the different policies might have different effects that you want to make clear when you're looking at the trade-offs across those. We're gonna look at the options or alternatives across the top, how you wanna package those. Should they be more comprehensive? So you're separating a public wall piece to a private wall incentive. So how do you decide when to package and when to look at those as separate policies? And what to put in the cells there. What kinds of evidence do you really need? How do you weigh the quality of evidence? How do you make it comparable so that your trade-offs across the different policies just pop out so you can really use those? Because ultimately this is the tool to make choices. That someone is going to look at this, maybe many people, many stakeholders are going to look at this information to try and decide what happens next.
Excellent, and remember that in each of those things Marika ticked off, how you calculate the likely results, the likely performance of your alternative in the face of your criteria, the design of the criteria and how it's measured in the first place, the shape of the policy alternative, what specific thing you propose, and how you weigh the evidence, all go back to foregone units of opportunity creation and misery prevention for the citizen. In the wall falling prevention or the motorcycle prevention, your solution or your improvement of how we do could be anywhere in there. In the case of motorcycles, some way to get more people into voluntary motorcycle training that's better or something. And you could have the tendency of saying, oh, it's just stuff. It isn't just stuff. It's huge. And so in the next unit, in the next session this morning, Marika will take a deep dive with you into each aspect of Bardak's process and why it matters and how to avoid the banana peel. Questions, thoughts, concerns, insights, insults about what we're doing? When Dylan gave you the bad news about Humpty, I was about to say one other thing about what we hope from you. We want candidness from you, because some of this material is not what you do on a daily basis. We really, really, really want the yes, comma, but, ... If you're sitting there and thinking, oh yeah, I have good ideas that are valuable, but my electeds won't listen, or whatever you're thinking, we want to hear. We thought about these things. We're not sitting out there thinking that analytical processes are pure as the driven snow, and we have our ideas about how strategy and politics intersects with policy analytics. So if you've got a yes but about that, let it go. Don't let the moment pass you by and you're thinking, oh God, okay, well, I really want to know this, but Marika's moved forward, so I'm just not gonna. So go, wait, but what about this? And you'll be glad you did. So that's what we want from you, okay, and as you know, we want focus. I didn't even know that a football team was playing, so now I know. So we want your focus, and by the time we get done on Sunday afternoon, you'll be glad that you did. So we're taking a break. Did you have something you wanted to say, my friend? You're the best alarm creator I've ever had.
My favorite part of my job.
Dylan, you want to do the alarm? She said, are you kidding? What's my prompt? Okay, 15-minute break, thank you.
Take 15.
Isn't it 15?